My one and only experience with a safe room happened in 2010. It was in a very nice house right on the beach on the west coast of Australia by the Timor Sea. It was my first year in college, and my entire political science class had been invited to a party to celebrate the resignation of the Prime Minister. I didn't know the host personally, but my teacher did, and despite the place being as big as a hotel, every room in the house was packed with guests, drinking, mingling, and making boring conversation. I barely knew anyone except for my classmates, so most of us drank some champagne out by the pool. And after a few of us had overindulged, we started daring each other to strip off some layers and jump into the water. After about 6 people were in the pool in their underwear splashing around and making noise, I figured any negative attention would be directed more at the people in the pool than around it. My bestie and I helped each other out of our dresses, and we sat at the side of the pool with our legs in the water. There was one younger guy around our age who I didn't recognize, who was nice enough to keep refilling our drinks while we sat and kicked our legs in the water. He said his name was Hugo. And my friend Tanya and I continued to make jokes about how he better not be spiking our drinks. He wasn't a servant or anything, he was just being nice. But we knew what he was after, of course, and we figured he would keep coming back to enjoy the view of us in our lacy underwear, waiting for us to get just drunk enough. To his disappointment, I imagine, we both knew when to cut ourselves off, and we eventually stood up and got dressed again, then went back inside. I mingled for another 40 minutes or so, and eventually lost track of Tanya. After returning from the bathroom, I noticed Hugo waiting for me patiently at the end of the hall. When I walked over to say hello, he produced a rose from behind his back. It was so sweet and cheesy that it actually melted my heart a bit, and we spent the next few minutes making out next to a grandfather clock in the hall. He paused for a moment and said that there was a more private place we could go, and I followed him into a back office that was unoccupied. At first, I was fine with it. I figured that he would just close the door and we would get frisky on the desk. The sounds of the party weren't far away, and there were plenty of windows. But instead he led me to a sliding door half hidden by a curtain, which opened into an even smaller office without windows. It had one desk, a chair, and a couch. I walked in for a peek, and it suddenly occurred to me what I was standing in. I asked, "Is this a panic room?" He nodded, and without hesitating, smacked a button on the wall, and a metal door slid shut with a thud. It was like an elevator door, but much heavier. He whispered, "No one can hear us in here," and began kissing my neck. I don't know if he meant that to be reassuring or not, but it came across as creepy. And I immediately broke away and said, "No way, I'm not doing this in here. Open the door." His expression was confused and hurt for a split second, and then he got irritated. He whispered, "Come on, don't be like that." I pivoted away from him, but he moved to intercept me and was blocking my way out. "Please, I get claustrophobic. Open the door." He kissed me and whispered, "Don't worry about it. Let's use the couch." He put his hands on my waist and tried to guide me to the couch, but I resisted. "Not until you open the door." That's when he put his hand on my stomach and physically pushed me back towards the couch. I distinctly remember thinking, "Okay, I tried to be nice." I had been harassed and stalked by a neighbor several years before, so I made it a habit to always have something on me to defend myself. I lowered my hands and popped a tiny false pearl off my ring, exposing the tiny pin underneath. I sat up on the couch and insisted one more time, in a stern voice, "I'm not kidding. Open the door." He lowered himself down to his knees and placed both hands on the inside of my thighs. When he leaned in, I cut the side of his face with my left hand and punched him as hard as I could with the right, burying the pin into his face. I didn't hit his eye, but I came pretty close. He immediately leapt back and started cursing and yowling like a cat does when you step on its tail. I jumped up and maneuvered around him. I hit the button and got the hell out of there. I shoved myself not very gently through the crowd until I found my teacher and a handful of other students in front of the hall. A few of them were leaving in their own cars. I immediately asked if I could catch a ride. I didn't tell anybody about what happened until later that night, when Tanya returned to the dorm. In retrospect, that was kind of a risky thing to do, because he could have potentially trapped another girl in there with him. But I figured that I had given him enough of a sting that he probably would be in no condition to get it up for the rest of the night. I never saw him again. I'm not entirely sure if his plan was to rape me, but if not, it was an awkward and creepy attempt at being romantic that severely backfired. Maybe if I was drunk it would have worked. People may accuse me of being a tease and leading him on, but the fact is I just didn't feel comfortable in that room, and he was bigger than me, and didn't open the door after I persistently asked him to. I work for a private security company, and my primary job is a safe room technician. Basically, I am sent to test, do routine maintenance on, and repair or upgrade anything that needs service regarding a safe room or a bank vault. I've only had to physically break into a safe room twice in my life. Normally, removing people from the safety of one is a police matter, and usually just involves drilling a hole through a wall. Usually, people trying to evade the police in this manner eventually come out when they get hungry enough. Or in the case of an emergency, the police will toss in a smoke grenade through the hole they drilled. Once I was called in after the police negotiation failed, and a man shot himself in the room. I had to use a plasma cutter to cut away the outer door and disarm the locks. The man had fallen against the door, so when it slid open, he practically fell out on my feet. Dried blood was still caked over his face and clothes, but the second incident was far worse. A few years later, I was called in by local police to break open a safe room door in a basement. The house was on the market, and the real estate company had asked me to help get it open, so that they could present it to potential buyers. I told them that if it was locked, someone was likely inside, but they assured me that couldn't be the case, because no one had set foot on that property in months. I arrived at the house to inspect the room, taking into consideration that a power surge might have tripped something and sealed the door shut. The agency didn't want me to damage the door, if at all possible, but after running a few tests on the control panel, I told them that it was sealed from the inside, and short of blowing it open and risking structural damage to the house, the only way in was me cutting through the door. They weren't happy about that, but I was more concerned that someone had killed themselves in there, and I was about to have another corpse fall out onto my shoes. After disarming all the locks and messing around with the control panel again, the door slid open, and the stench hit me immediately. On the carpeted floor, lying face down, was a withered corpse of a man. Both of his hands had been resting upon the inside of the door. The agency had gone through the local police to contact me, but they were not on scene. I called them right away, and they informed me not to let anyone enter the room. An investigation team showed up and questioned me. It turns out that the man's legs had been broken in 3 places each, most likely with a heavy instrument, such as a sledgehammer. He had been left to die in the room, being unable to sit up and reach the button to open the door. I went back and disassembled the control panel, and discovered the wiring behind it had been tampered with, potentially allowing someone to seal the door from the outside if they knew what they were doing. That night I told my family about it. My brother-in-law's first words were, "Like the guy at the end of Saw?" And at those words, a sick, chilling feeling swept over me. Some poor man had been brutally attacked and was left to slowly starve in a sealed room where there was no escape, and no one was anywhere near close enough to hear his calls for help. Not that anyone could have opened the door anyway. If the police ever arrested anyone for the murder, I was never informed. The real estate company kept the story quiet, so as not to dissuade anyone from viewing the house. Not that it mattered, as the place remained an open crime scene for quite some time afterwards. I told the cops that the killer may have been somebody with a history in my field, but they didn't seem convinced. I often wonder about that man, and how long it took him to die, all alone and in pain, knowing that he was never going to escape. I still wonder what the reason was, and who the last person he ever saw or thought about. It keeps things in perspective for me, and ever since that day, even on my worst days, I remind myself that at least I'm free, and can look up and see the sun. People never believe me when I tell this story. My closest friends don't even believe me. My parents didn't believe it when they were alive, and even my own wife and kids doubt me. Back when I used to live in Nova Scotia, I worked for a man that would buy houses and flip them after renovating them. He would try to do a thorough inspection both before and after renovations took place, but there were normally a couple of houses he missed, and I was the one who was sent to inspect those. I don't remember the exact date, but it was in late July of 2000. The rain was pouring outside, and thunder was shaking the house. The roof had been retiled, and I was inspecting to see if there were any leaks, and if all the windows were watertight. I was alone in the house. I was sitting in a small office space which also served as a safe room. It was connected to the master bedroom, and the only way in and out of the safe room was through the bedroom. I was writing up my report and getting ready to leave when I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. I glanced up at the security feed on the TV in front of me. The security cameras had been set up the day before, and even though they were on, nothing had been set to record. I noticed a dark figure coming up the stairs from the kitchen towards the bedrooms. I knew that now the renovations were done, and only 3 people had the key to this house. The other 2 weren't anywhere near the place. Feeling slightly concerned, I pushed the button to the safe room door. I watched the monitors as the dark figure paused, as though it heard the rumble of the door shutting, and then it continued up to the landing. There were only 2 cameras on the second floor, one at the top of the stairs, and one pointing down the hall. I watched as the dark figure seemed to glide down the hallway, peeking in each room. Before entering the master bedroom, my blood turned to ice, and I turned around to look at the sealed door behind me. For several seconds, nothing happened. And then I distinctly heard the sound of a soft, reverberating thumping coming from outside the safe room. I turned back around and fixed my eyes on the monitor, but there was no camera angle to help me see what was happening. For several minutes, I sat there terrified, my eyes frozen to the screen, waiting for the figure to reemerge from the master bedroom. But it didn't. I broke out into a sweat and tried calling the police on my cell phone, but either because of the thick walls of the room, or the storm outside, or possibly both, I couldn't get any reception. After another few minutes of staring at the screen, I stood up and cautiously made my way towards the door. I pressed my ear up to it and heard muttering from inside the bedroom. I didn't hear much, but one thing I distinctly heard was part of a sentence which sounded like, "Bury you up to your neck." And suddenly, another thump came on the door. I was terrified. Not only was this figure not leaving, but it seemed to know I was in there and wanted to hurt me. It was the longest night of my life. I stayed fixed in the chair, staring at the monitor practically non-stop, barely blinking for 6 hours, occasionally checking my phone for reception, but no one ever left the master bedroom. I would occasionally check the other cameras in the house, just in case I missed something, but I never saw any other movement. I finally broke down and dozed off for about 15 minutes before snapping awake again. Dawn had arrived, and light was beginning to fill the house. I didn't see the figure or any sign that it had left. Summoning up all my courage, I stood up. I took in a deep breath and opened the door, half convinced that I would be looking right into the eyes of a madman. I nearly had a heart attack when daylight hit my eyes, but there was no one in the room. Whoever had been there had vanished. I quickly gathered my things and shut the door behind me, and immediately my phone started buzzing, showing me that I had several missed calls. As I was about to leave the room, I glanced back and noticed a small red smear on the outside of the safe room door. It was barely an inch long, but noticeable enough for me to be certain that it hadn't been there the night before. I ran down to my car and floored it out of there. I never went back. but I later sent 2 of my friends back to the house to see if there had been any signs of forced entry, which there wasn't. My family is convinced that I had some kind of fever dream, but I know what happened, and the experience still traumatizes me to this day. I still get nervous about being all alone in large houses. Someone suggested that the figure may have been paranormal, like a spirit haunting the house, and I admit that that is a possibility, but I can't get over the red smear on the door. In my mind's eye, I can't stop visualizing a mad man with a bloody face pressed to the door, leaving a noseprint on its smooth surface, whispering menacingly,
"Bury you up to your neck."
There's always a reason to be afraid.